Good afternoon. Good after lunch. Habari zenu? Umechoka? Pole sana. He's saying he's tired, for those who don't understand Swahili. And I hope I won't tire you too much in the next 25 minutes. My name is Makumi, as was introduced earlier. I work for the Salvation Army. I coordinate response to modern slavery and human trafficking in Africa, and we are currently in 17 countries, and that's what I get to do on a daily basis. And this is a topic that's very close to my heart. And when I was invited to come and give a talk on this, I was more than delighted. And so thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. And thank you. So my presentation or my talk will be looking at 4 main areas. I think the first thing is just to first find out what is modern slavery and human trafficking in general as a definition, and also in our context here in Africa. We're also going to look at the biblical perspective, and also why should we be involved, and how can we get involved. And my aim or my prayer is that by the end of this talk, that we'll have ideas on how to prioritize or be intentional in prioritizing the response to modern slavery and human trafficking, especially as a church. And one of the things that I always say is that the church has a very big platform and a very big foothold in the community. In Kenya here, I don't think you can walk more than 10 meters before you come into contact with a church. True or false? In many African countries as well. And so we have a very big opportunity to actually raise awareness on modern slavery and human trafficking. And I always ask myself, why modern slavery and human trafficking? Why is it modern? Yeah? And that's something that we possibly should all ask ourselves. I'll start off with a story, and this is a story of Belinda. Not her real name, not her real photo. And one time in 2016, I was sitting in the office, and my boss at the time told me he'd just gotten a call from one of our friends in the police, and they wanted us to make an opportunity or to create an opening for a child who was coming to school in one of our schools for the blind. Salvation Army has some schools for the blind in the country. And I am not in education, or rather I was not working in the education department at the time, so I wondered why was he interested in that. And he said, and I want to understand what is happening with children with albinism. Why are they always being referred to us every so often and always looks like it's an emergency? Belinda had just been kidnapped from a town known as Motito. It's along the highway on your way to Mombasa, or the coast. And she was actually heading to Tanzania. A very young girl, 8 years old, brilliant future, but she'd just been kidnapped and basically was being trafficked for the reasons that the traffickers knew at the time. And this was the 4th case in a period of less than 6 months. And so it became a concern to us, what is really happening? And I believe this is not a unique story to Kenya. Modern slavery is not just an African problem, it's an Asia problem, America problem. It's really a global problem. So what is modern slavery and human trafficking? So one of the things we need to know is that modern slavery and human trafficking is a crime. Yeah, it's an organized crime. And for human trafficking, it's actually a collection of crimes bundled together rather than a single offense. There are many times that we think it's only when the person gets to exploitation that would justify it as human trafficking. However, as you're going to see shortly, it's actually a collection of crimes bundled together. And research tells us that it's actually the 3rd largest crime in the world after arms and drugs trafficking. And it generates lots of money to the tune of $7 to $10 billion annually for traffickers. And just to put that into context, there was a research that was done 5 years ago in 2018 here in Kenya. And it said that Kenya is caught up in a 15 trillion shillings web. You know, that's the equivalent of $100,000, US dollars, possibly. And for those of you who are Kenyan, you know that is enough money to run our Kenyan government for about 3 to 4 years, you know. So it's a lot of money. It's a lot of money that we are talking about. And obviously, it's a business for somebody. It's generating income for somebody. And if we are going to involve ourselves in it, it means we are also interfering with somebody's livelihood. And so what is modern slavery? Modern slavery is an umbrella term that looks at various issues to do with human rights, human trafficking being one of them. And it actually looks at the aspect of exploitation of human beings, whether it is for labor, for sexual exploitation, organ trafficking, and so on. And many times, people who are trapped in modern slavery and human trafficking find it so hard to come out of it because of the threats they go through. Many of them go through a lot of what we call grooming, violence is involved, abuse of power, abuse of position of vulnerability. There's a lot of deception that is involved, and many of them find it extremely hard. If you listen to testimonies of people who have come out of trafficking, they'll always tell you they had many opportunities to leave, but they couldn't because of what they had been conditioned. The United Nations gives us a very long, mouthful definition of what human trafficking is, but it's important that we understand what it is. Because as I started off by saying, human trafficking is not just a single offense or is not just a one-time kind of event. It's actually a collection of crimes. And the United Nations, in the Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, says that human trafficking is the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of threat, use of force, other forms of coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power, position of vulnerability, giving or receiving payments or benefits to achieve the consent of a person, having control over that person for the purpose of exploitation. So if we are considering or looking at a case and want to understand, is this a human trafficking case, that's actually what you'd look out for. And as we are saying, it's a very mouthful definition. And for that reason, we normally categorize it or break it down into three: the activity, the means, and the purpose. Under activity, we have the recruitment, the harboring, and the moving, and the receipt of persons, the means, and the purpose. Now, I need to say here, many of our countries here in Africa, and even out of Africa, have actually signed up to this protocol. What does that mean? That means that this definition applies to each one of our countries, even in the laws that are in our countries to counter human trafficking. That is to say, if we are considering a case and the law determines that it's a case of human trafficking, many a times, any activity that is involved in this process, or any process in that case, so whether it is you are involved in the activity aspect, or the means, or the purpose, then that could lead you into being charged with human trafficking. Are we together? Great. However, for children, it's even more lenient. For children, the means doesn't have to be there. Yeah, we've just seen the means in the previous definition, where we are talking about the means is how you get the consent of this person to be able to be in a trafficking situation. However, for children, they are considered not being able or having the capacity to make a decision on, are you giving them the right information, are you lying to them? And so many of our laws, and even the UN definition of human trafficking, for as long as the activity and the purpose is there, child trafficking has occurred. And for that, we're actually seeing many cases that are actually successfully charging traffickers with child trafficking, because the threshold of proof is much, much, much lower for children. So why does human trafficking and slavery continue to thrive? I mean, we are now calling it modern slavery. Like, I always, anytime I think about it, I am like, why does it have to be modernized? And one of the things I would say is people just don't want to do anything about it. You know, we want to fold our hands. We don't want to take any action. It's been happening for so many years. We are fatigued, possibly, or we don't know what to do about it. So inaction is one of the reasons that human trafficking continues to thrive. Number two is the rapid internet penetration. You know, we have very low awareness on digital threats, especially post-COVID, where we had so many of our children, many of us becoming more and more engaged in the online and electronic media space. However, how many took time to do proper supervision or look at what are the digital threats? And for that reason, we are now seeing a lot of online scamming, much more than even in the previous years. We have very beautiful laws to counter human trafficking. In Kenya, we have a very nice law. However, the implementation of these laws and policies in many countries is very slow. But I must also say that the threshold of proof for human trafficking is also very high. So that's also something that needs also a balance as well. Then also the other social and inherent vulnerabilities, poverty, illiteracy, migration, greed, where people are interested in getting cheap labor. For example, unemployment. Gender is also another factor of vulnerability. And these are some of the other factors that actually make modern slavery and human trafficking continue to thrive. And one other one that I haven't put on this slide is the fact that modern slavery and human trafficking is also very organized, as I started off by saying. So if we are responding to it in a disorganized way, then they are always ahead of us. So why should we get involved as a church? Number one, it's biblical, even before we even think of anything else. The book of Amos, chapter 5, verses 24, we see it says that let judgment run down as the waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. And there's a call on our lives to move beyond simply perceiving injustice and actually taking some action towards it. You know, there's a difference between realizing that there's a terrible problem and actually doing something about it. We are also shepherds of the flock of Jesus Christ, I believe. And in Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel, chapter 34, verses 1 to 16, actually talks about who are the true shepherds of God's flock. And I want to have an emphasis on verses 2 that says, Son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, thus says the Lord God, woe to you, shepherds of Israel, who only take care of yourselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? We have a call for us to take care of the flock. And at this point, I also want to talk about restorative justice. Sometimes we focus so much on those who go through the trafficking, and we forget that even the traffickers are souls that belong to Christ. So there is a double-sided coin here, where we are looking at those who go through trafficking and those who actually perpetuate the trafficking. As a church, we are not called to be partial. We have to be impartial, so that we can also include even and see how do we also involve and bring back the traffickers and have them change their ways. The other one is historical reasons. And obviously, we are now saying it's modern slavery and human trafficking, which means that this has been going on for many years. You know, people have been trying to eradicate or to respond to modern slavery and human trafficking. The gentleman on the screen, most of you may know him, John Newton. He was an atheist, but he was also a slave trader. And he was involved in a very successful business of, bringing slaves from Africa to Europe. And one time, as he was doing that on the seas, because they used to do it on the seas, there was a storm. And despite being an atheist, despite not believing in God, he actually started praying, and the storm calmed down. And from there, he found his faith and started seeking much more to find out more about the Christian faith. But he still continued with, slave trade. And he says, or the story says that 34 years later is when he actually realized that what he was doing was wrong. May we not be like John Newton, that we only realize when it is too late or much, much later, because like John Newton actually says that he feels that he only became a Christian much, much later after so many years of still continuing in his old ways. And so we have the historical reasons, obviously, to keep fighting for human trafficking, against human trafficking, because this is something that has been going on for many years. It doesn't mean that we now get tired and say, we throw our hands in the air. We are tired. It can't be done. If someone has been doing it, then we still can also do something about it. And if you know the song Amazing Grace, I'm sure you know he's the one who wrote it. The second reason is for global reasons. Global, but very local reasons. Yes, modern slavery and human trafficking is a global problem. But the truth is, it's also a very local problem. And one of the things we need to do is to first and foremost own it. In our African setting, many of our cultural practices and social practices border very thinly on modern slavery and human trafficking. Are we ready to have that conversation and actually own the problem and say we have modern slavery and human trafficking happening in our backyards, in our churches, in our communities? After owning it, or owning the problem, then speaking up, having that holy anger. Isaiah 58 verses 1 talks about shout out, do not hold back. And then after we do that, then we need to do something about it. And I will repeat and say that faith leaders are in a very unique position to see the hearts of their communities. As I talk about owning the problem, in South Africa, my colleagues were telling me about Ukutwala. Yeah? In Zimbabwe, there's something called Ngozi, and it actually is considered to be African spirituality, where we want to appease the dead spirits or the ancestral spirits. But really, it's children who are being taken through modern slavery and human trafficking. In Kenya here, we have the early and forced marriages. We have a lot of domestic servitude. And not just in Kenya, but I'm talking about in general in our African setting. And so the change that we want to see as a church must really begin also with us, and hence the reason for us to own the problem first. We also need to recognize the impact that we can have on individuals and communities. Like I started off by saying that churches have a very big foothold in the communities that they are in, and have a platform also to do advocacy, to mobilize communities, and also to provide services for those who've been affected and support the government and the NGOs on a localized basis. Then the fourth reason is for humanity reasons. We all know Genesis chapter 1, verses 27, that says we are all created in the image of God. And if really we value human dignity, we value that we are all created in the image of God, there's no need for us to then take advantage or exploit each other. Mark chapter 12, verses 31 talks about the love for our neighbors as we love ourselves. So if we are loving our neighbors as we love ourselves, there is absolutely no way that we are going to also exploit other people, and also the value for life and the body and human dignity. So then what are we to do, or what do we need to do? Next year marks the 10th anniversary of the joint declaration of the religious leaders against modern slavery, where we had 100 signatories that pledged to fight modern slavery, and all these were representatives from different faiths, including Christians, we had the Orthodox, we had the Pentecostals, Methodists, and so on and so forth. And that is actually a good step. That was a first good step. But I believe that by the time we're having this 10th anniversary next year, it's time to also reflect, what have we done? Was it just a signing and saying, we are committing to do this? What exactly are we doing in the local churches? And I propose to us that one of the things that we need to do is to empower faith leaders to respond to modern slavery and human trafficking. If human trafficking is an organized crime, we too need to respond in an organized way. It doesn't make sense for us to be haphazard in our way of response. So we need to come together as people of faith and see how do we then respond in an organized way to be able to fight this particular crime. And that one of the ways is to empower our faith leaders. Secondly, in the interest of time, is also to increase awareness, increase understanding, impact, and action. And this is one of the ways that I would actually propose for us to do this. Have us understand what is the issue. What is the issue of modern slavery and human trafficking? Contextualizing it in our own settings, in our countries, in our communities, and then come up with ways to respond to it and eventually act and have a time to reflect on whether we are doing the right way according to our faith, in the light of our faith. And then finally, it's also to inspire people to engage with the issue of modern slavery as an extension of their faith. And of course, this speaks a lot to behavior change. And behavior change is influenced a lot by social norms, personal attitudes, and governance and the laws, how people feel and think, the expectations. And if we are going to inspire people to engage with the issue of modern slavery as an extension of their faith, then we need to also be able to affect their behavior changes, especially where cultural practices and social practices are involved. And so the inclusion of this topic in our curriculums would actually help us make our response to modern slavery intentional. You know, we all recognize that modern slavery and human trafficking is not an isolated issue. Secondly, it creates a community of practice. And this is a group of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do. They learn how to do it better. They share resources. It's a place of encouragement and interact regularly. And so this is actually another very key thing that would actually help in the inclusion of the curriculum. And finally, it is providing a place for training and guidance, especially on the policies and laws, best practices and compliance that is required. Just yesterday, we saw a ruling here in Kenya on the Data Protection Act, where they have started cracking the whip on institutions or entrepreneurs that are not abiding by that act. And it has come as a surprise to many because not many are aware of this act. Yes, they know it exists, but they don't have the training on it. They don't know what compliance looks like. And so for us as well, we also need to have that training, especially for our faith leaders. And I would like to emphasize on this, even as we reflect on how does it affect us as a church. Just to give one example, many of our churches have places of residence where we host people, where we have people coming to stay with us. And we have seen a few of our churches being linked to human trafficking just because they hosted, traffickers or victims of trafficking in their institutions or in their places of residence. So the problem is not too far away from us. It's probably just right in our backyard. Thank you very much. My time is up.